Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks. Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Continuing Education, Bachelor's Degree Program, Elective Course, Rural Development, BRDE-101 Rural Development, Indian Context, Block, 4 State and Rural Development Unit 3 Rural Development Programs, a retrospect. 3.0 Aims and Objectives. After studying this unit, you should be able to understand the need for rural development programs, have a glimpse of the early attempts and experiments in rural development, critically evaluate the 11E strategies adopted for community development program, examine the impact of the Green Revolution, assess anti-poverty programs and programs to promote backward areas. Explain the Integrate.cl Rural Development Program, IRDP, in detail. Describe the main features of TRISM and GRA. Discuss the developments in rural employment programs, and describe the need for Employment Assurance Scheme. 3.1 Introduction. During the pro-independence days in India, the development scenario was quite pathetic. The nation lagged behind in development while it was under the rule of British colonialists for almost 200 years. The British colonial masters took away our raw material and dumped finished products which were machine-made from their country, comparatively cheaper than indigenous products. The Indian artisans could not compete with the British products. As a consequence, artisans were pushed to the wall, throwing threat to their survival. Pushed to penury and circumstances in which it was difficult to survive. Unable to compete with the onslaught of British products, artisans were forced to become agricultural laborers. Thus it added more to the already burdened agriculture with people from the non-farming sectors. Barring few, agriculture became the only occupation of most of the Indians. India remained largely rural, as manufacturing activities were nipped from the bud before they could bloom to their full potential. Without manufacturing activities, which could have resulted in development of modern industries and lead to growth of urban areas, India had to bloat with unskilled rural population, lagging behind, while the Western countries became advanced nations in the world. The situation further got accentuated as the agricultural land got concentrated in the hands of the few. Only very few portions of the land catered to the need of large majority of the population. Such a skewed relationship of land and population was bound to differentiate the income levels of the few from that of the majority of the rural population. While the few could corner all the benefits and were well off, the majority of the population could barely eke out an existence. To add to the woes of the rural population, often the rain-dependent peasants had to confront unfavorable natural calamities, be it drought or flood, which had its telling effect on the agriculture production, pushing further to precarious situations. The small and marginal farmers were also thrown into abject poverty. The vagaries of nature had often created havoc with the lives of the people in rural areas, as they were dependent on it for their existence. With the independence, it was quite natural for the country to make efforts to do away with the stagnation and check further deterioration. The country did make remarkable progress in the first decade, getting huge industries built and making strides in scientific progress. The educated, business communities and other elites in the country took advantage of the freedom to further consolidate their position. The resultant economic growth made the better off more well off. But there was hardly any trickle-down effect. The poor remained poor, especially in the rural areas. Thus it was felt, left to itself, the rural India cannot improve its situation on its own. Because of the legacy of neglect from the British lay, the skewed relationship of land with the rural people, frequent vagaries of nature and negligible trickle-down effect. If at all the conditions were to improve, then it warranted initiative from the government as well as other development agencies. The concern of the government for ameliorating the conditions of rural poor can be well appreciated by assessing the measures taken by the central government, in cooperation with state governments in launching various programs primarily to improve a lot of the rural poor and their living conditions. 3.2 Early attempts and experiments in rural development. Before we go into the various programs launched by the government, it is worthwhile you have a glimpse of the early efforts pertaining to rural development. The country witnessed many attempts and experiments to bring about development in rural areas. Some of them are as follows. 1. Rabindranath Tagore's Rural Reconstruction and Sri Niketan Institute was established in 1921 with the main objective to bring back life in its completeness into the villages, making rural folk self-reliant and self-respectful, acquainted with the cultural traditions of their own country and competent to make an efficient use of modern resources for the improvement of their physical, intellectual and economic conditions. 2. The Marthandam Rural Reconstruction Experiment was started by Dr. Spencer Hatch in 1921 with the purpose to bring about a complete development towards a more abundant life for rural people, spiritually, mentally, physically, socially and economically. 3. Gurgaon experiment began in the year 1927 was aimed at nothing more or less than a revival of the old-fashioned virtues of hard work, thrift, self-respect, self-control, self-help, mutual help and mutual respect. 4. Baroda experiment started in the year 1932 was aimed at developing a will to live better and a capacity for self-help and self-reliance. 5. Gandhian constructive W0RK consisted of I. Use of khadi. 2. Promotion of village industries. 3. Removal of untouchability. 4. Basic and adult education. V. Village cleanliness. Y. Communal harmony. 7. Prohibition. 8. Education in health and hygiene. 9. Woman upliftment. X. Propagation of national language. 6. Phirka scheme in Madras was aimed at organizing the villagers for a happier, more prosperous and fuller life in which the individual villagers will have the opportunity to develop both as an individual and as unit of one integrated society. 7. The Nilokheri project was known as Majdoor Manzil, that was based on the principle of he wouldn't work, neither he shall eat. 3.3 Community Development Program. After independence, the launching of the Community Development Program, with the collaboration of Ford Foundation in the early 50s on 2nd of October 1952 marked the beginning of planned rural development in this country in large scale. It was a holistic approach as it encompassed not only agriculture but also infrastructure and basic facilities in the villages. The main objective of the Community Development Program as mentioned by Mohinder Singh is as follows. The utilization of the vast untapped resources dormant in the countryside and harnessing the utilized energy in the villages. To encourage rural people to become self-reliant and responsible citizens. Even to make them capable and instilling in them an urge to participate effectively, imparting with knowledge and understanding in the building of the nation. To inculcate the spirit of self-help among the rural population by organizing the development work through local self-governance institutions like panchayats and cooperative societies. To focus in sustained manner with more emphasis on improving and modernizing agriculture practices and methods essential for increased agricultural production. To utilize the free time of the villagers for the benefit of the community as a whole. The largest possible extension of the principles of cooperation by making rural families creditworthy. A peaceful attack on the five giants, i.e. starvation and disease, squalor, ignorance and idleness, and to upgrade the social status of the village teacher and to enable him to participate in the program. According to S.N. Mishra, the Community Development Program was to be executed with the help of village-level workers who were to be supported by a team of subject matter specialists in the field of agriculture, animal husbandry, cooperatives, panchayats, social education, public health, and program for women and children, etc. He was of the opinion, unparalleled in the history of any developing country, it was an epoch-making step. Jawaharlal Nehru went to the extent of saying that it was a silent revolution.
You are listening to this audiobook on Audio Learn IGNOU. Check your progress. 1. What are the main objectives of Community Development Program? However, the Community Development Program was not without shortcomings. As Dr. Hoshiar Singh pointed out that the community program was too diffuse to give concrete results, and due to limited finances, the multi-prong attack was not possible and certain priority has to be drawn to solve the problem of food shortage. A more specific limited purpose or minimum package was supposed to be the way out. 3.4 Impact of Green Revolution. In the 60s, when Community Development Program was gaining newer heights, the country was confronting acute food shortage. To avert the food crisis, the entire effort of rural development was geared to ensure increase in agricultural production. Then, programs like the Intensive Agricultural Development Program, IADP, and the Intensive Agricultural Area Program, IAAP, were launched in the year 1966 to enhance agricultural production. It was followed by High-Yielding Varieties Program, HYVP. The nation achieved remarkable results in gaining high levels of agriculture production to be self-sufficient in food production. This was known as the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution to a large extent freed us from the dependence on countries like USA and others for food, but it was not without problems. These programs could not improve the conditions of rural communities. Besides, unemployment and inequalities in income and wealth continuously increased despite phenomenal increase in agricultural production. Two problems cropped up. One was regional imbalance and second was income disparities among sections of rural population. Green revolution was possible in areas that had favorable agroclimatic condition with high potential for agriculture, while the remaining areas were left backward. Moreover, it is only big farmers who had sizable land and afford to adopt modern methods in agriculture production with necessary scientifically ascertained inputs, reaped the benefits of green revolution. The smaller and marginal farmers could not take advantage of modern technology as their land was of small size, nor they could go for scientific production as they lacked resources. In consequence, difference in income between the big and smaller farmers widened. The mechanized farming of the big farmers reduced their dependence on agricultural laborers. So farming of the big farmers became less labor-intensive, leading to unemployment of agriculture laborers. Thus not only there was hardly any trickle-down effort in agriculture production of the Green Revolution, the problem got aggravated by mass disengagement of agriculture laborers by big farmers. 3.5 Assessing poverty. This was the period when entire world was caught in the debate of development versus underdevelopment. This notion of development was attributed to growth with social justice or growth with redistribution by the developing countries. Witnessing the common problem of mass poverty. The problem of poverty was such gripping that there was a general agreement on an absolute level of poverty, apart from the relative poverty that existed among the rural population. The outcome of this realization was the formation of the concept of poverty line, which became a useful tool to measure levels of poverty and also design strategies to alleviate rural poverty, as stated by Dr. B.K. Taplial. Taking the above into consideration, remedial measures were suggested in the fourth five-year plan to mitigate the problem of regional imbalances and disparities in income of sections of rural population. Taplial mentions accordingly two streams of special rural development programs, one for minimizing regional imbalances and the other to reduce income disparities between various sections of the rural people, was started during the fourth plan. It was during fourth and fifth plans three kinds of measures characterized the approaches to alleviation of poverty. A national program of minimum needs. Programs designed to reduce regional disparities and promote development of backward areas, and anti-poverty programs directed at specific target groups. 3.6 Anti-poverty programs and programs to promote backward areas. To do away with the ill effects of the Green Revolution, a program especially for the smaller and marginal farmers was launched in 1973-74. It was known as Small Farmers Development Agency, SFDA. This was followed by the Marginal Farmers and Agriculture Laborer, MFAL, agency to take special care of the marginal farmers, the artisans and agriculture laborers. In the year 1976, MPhil, being similar to STFA, was merged with SFDA. The STFA was supposed to cater to all sections of the poor, the small, marginal and the agriculture laborers. But it so happened in such a way that it concentrated on those who had some land at their disposal, neglecting laborers, which in consequence aggravated the unemployment problem among them. The penniless and unskilled poor in these rural areas had to confront acute unemployment. In 1974-75, in selected districts, crash employment program was introduced to give relief to those without work. This was followed in 1975 to 1976 by another wage employment program known as Pilot Intensive Rural Employment Program, PIREP, introduced in blocks which had chronic employment problem. The above-mentioned two programs had two distinct characteristics. A. Programs for self-employment, mainly focused on those with assets and/or skills, and B. Programs for wage employment targeting those who did not have any source of income other than their physical labor. There was overlapping of the programs like STFA and MPhil, which were wholly beneficial oriented, and the programs like the Drought Prone Area Program, DPAP, the Command Area Development Agency, CADA, and the Hill Area Development Agency, HADA, which had some components for direct assistance to beneficiaries. In the above programs, selection of beneficiaries were done primarily on the basis of the size of land. Other orientation like family income etc. were ignored, though as per the guidelines they were also to be taken into account. Moreover, these programs focused mainly on land-based activities while other opportunities of income were not taken into consideration. To do away with the inadequacies in the above programs, it was decided to put together all beneficiary-oriented elements of other programs with the STFA and to recast a new program that is integrated with various other sectors which have considerable potential for self-employment. Check your progress too. 1. What are the two programs with distinct characteristics in anti-poverty? Programs 3.7 Integrated Rural Development Program. In the year 1978, a new program known as the Integrated Rural Development Program, IRDP, was launched covering 2,300 blocks which were already under SFDA, DPAP, CADA and HADA. It was observed in the draft 6th Plan, 1978.83, that integration covers four principal dimensions: integration of sectoral programs, special integration, integration of social and economic processes, and above all the policies with a view to achieving a better fit between growth, reduction in poverty and employment generation. More specifically, it involves a sharp focus on target groups, comprising small and marginal farmers, agricultural laborers and rural artisans, and an extremely location-specific planning in rural areas. The salient features of IRD are as following. Similar to STFA, IRD focused on the same target group like small and marginal farmers, agricultural laborers and rural artisans. However, to a considerable extent there was deviation/difference in its operational strategy. The following are the salient features of the IRD. 1. Instead of size of land, for the first time the concept of poverty line was introduced to be the basis for identification and selection of beneficiaries. 2. Earning of Rs 3,500/ per annum formed basis of poverty line, i.e. those who earn less than Rs 3,500/ per annum were considered below poverty line and those who earn more were above the poverty line. 3. Baseline survey of family income formed the basis for identification of beneficiaries. 4. Similar to STFA beneficiaries, the subsidy rates were 25% for small farmers, 33.33% for others and 50% for SC/ST beneficiaries. Besides, the beneficiaries of any category in group scheme were entitled for 50% subsidy. 5. Initially the SC and ST were to be 30% of the beneficiaries, which was later increased to 50%. 6. Women from all the categories were to be 33.3%. This was later increased to 40%. 7. Areas covered under self-employment projects included agriculture development, animal husbandry, marine fishery, inland water and brackish water fisheries, social forestry, farm forestry, village and cottage industries, service sector of the rural economy and skill formation, mobility of labor to find gainful engagement as organized labor for development works. Studies pertaining to IRDP have revealed wrong selection of beneficiaries, inadequacy of loan amount and subsidy, rigid and non-cooperative attitude of the officials, corrupt practices in sanctioning of loans and passing of animals, lack of intersectoral linkages and infrastructural facilities, involvement of mediators, lack of adequate staff in the blocks, absence of effective supervision and follow-up actions. In fact, this has not only deprived the weaker section of getting intended benefits but has also resulted in diversion and misappropriation of funds. The failure of the IRDP to benefit the rural poor has been attributed to mainly two factors, as mentioned by Mohinder Singh. First, is the iniquitous economic and political structure. The political power structure could largely enhance identification of the beneficiaries and the actual quantum of loan and subsidy reacting the beneficiary, while the economic power structure influences the kind of assets given to the beneficiaries, the cost of maintaining the assets and the income which flows from the assets due to the presence of intermediaries and others in the input and product markets. It is argued that so long as such a situation continues to prevail, all the development programs will merely benefit the rich and powerful persons. The second, there is nothing wrong with the program as such, but the failure of the program should be ascribed to its proper formulation and non-implementation resulting from the disinterestedness on the part of the political leadership and lack of ability to translate policy into program by the bureaucracy. 3.8 Training of rural youth for self-employment. It was realized that perhaps it would be worthwhile to train the rural youth and women, which constituted a major portion of the rural productive force, for self-employment. Such training would be useful to convert a raw unskilled rural workforce into independent skilled self-employed entrepreneurs who may grow up to set up units of their own that would not only be self-engaging but also enable to further employ rural people, leading to reduction in the unemployment in the rural areas of the country. Thus, as an integral part of the IRD, training of rural youth for self-employment was launched on the 15th of August 1979. The main thrust of the scheme was on equipping the rural youth from families below the poverty line with necessary technical and entrepreneurial skills to enable them to take up self-employment in the broad fields of agriculture and allied activities, industries, service and business activities. Since 1983, it also included wage employment to train youth, where project linkages under specified condition were available, but such projects, to be cleared by the state-level coordination committee, were subject to fulfill the conditions that the entire project should be an integrated one, all other beneficiaries should be from one RD target group, at least 50% of the youth should be trained for self-employment either for secondary or tertiary sector activity. The training of all beneficiaries would be funded out of the TRISM funds, and the wage employment should be in secondary and tertiary sectors. It was meant for rural youth in the age group of 18 to 35 years from the families below the poverty line, and 1989-90 the upper age limit has been relaxed up to 45 years in the case of widows depending on themselves, freed bonded laborers, free convicts, persons displaced due to large development projects and cured leprosy patients. The coverage of SCs/STs and women have to be 30 and 33 to 1/3% respectively. It is the responsibility of the District Rural Development Agency to prepare and provide a resource inventory of training facilities to all block headquarters. Training may be imparted by institutions such as polytechnics, Krishi Vigyan Kendras, Nehru Yuva Kendras, KH_RD and village industries, training institutes, reputed voluntary organizations, reputed craftsmen, etc. The place of training should have adequate facilities in terms of faculty, buildings, etc. An existing institution could be made up to the mark by providing assistance for non-recurring expenditures for building reasonable hostel and dormitory accommodation, classrooms, work sheds, also to ensure provision of training aids and equipment. New institutions could be set up where there were not any infrastructural facility, like remote hilly and tribal areas. The training was flexible as far as duration was concerned, depending upon the types of courses. but generally speaking, it is not more than 6 months. Those who went through the training were given a stipend which varies according to the duration of the training and the place of training. The trainees were also provided with a toolkit. After successfully completing the training, they were considered eligible to receive a subsidiary/credit/income generating asset under IRDP. After completion of training, backward and forward linkages were necessary to provide the trained youth the needful support to enhance their opportunities for self-employment. Backward linkages basically comprise inputs and infrastructural support to the trainees, whereas forward linkages relate mainly to the demand for and marketing of the products produced by them. For the trainees, the BRDE is responsible for coordinating or providing these linkages. For this, it has to maintain contacts with institutions that can provide such linkages. Such functional public undertakings are selected as can provide infrastructural support and also supply inputs. Funds earmarked for infrastructure development under IRDP may be utilized for developing such institutions. Moreover, district cooperative marketing societies, DCMS, also provide marketing support for IRDP goods. In addition, local halts, bazaars, and regulated agricultural markets have a useful role to play in marketing of their products. However, there were shortcomings in the CZ conducting of TRISM. They were as follows. The implementation was not even across the country. It did not instill the necessary confidence among the trainees to venture for self-employment. The package offered after training was not appropriate to the need of the trainees. The trainees lacked needful aptitude. There were lacunae in training arrangements and the syllabuses prescribed by various institutions entrusted to conduct TRISM. District industries centers were not much involved in TRISM. There was hardly any coordination among the DIC, banks and training institutes. The trades were selected without proper consideration of self-employment possibility and their financial viability. Assistance regarding provision of raw materials and marketing was not as expected. 1. The trained youth were left to their fate without any follow-upon concern. Check your progress. 3. 1. What is TRISM? You are listening to this audiobook on Audio Learn IGNOU. 3.9 Development of Women and Children in Rural Areas. The development of women and children in rural areas was launched in 50 districts a pilot basis in 1983 as a sub-scheme of IRDP. Gradually, more and more districts came under DRA and by 1990-91 the entire country was brought under its coverage. It became an independent program in 1990. Mohinder Singh mentions its major thrust is to organize women in groups and through these groups they can increase their earnings, acquire new skills, reduce their daily workload, and have better access to credit facilities. DRA as a program was formulated with the purpose of enhancing the opportunities of rural women. It was designed to provide them the support for productive income-generating activities, like credit facilities, productive assets, marketing networks etc. along with imparting them capacity-building skills. The beneficiaries of DRA were to be the same as that of IRDP and TRISM. The difference between IRDP and the DRA is that, while in the former the individual families were the recipients of the assistance, in the later, the group were to receive assistance. As per the DRA program, groups were to be formed with 15 to 20 women, with a purpose to work together for activities which are mutually beneficial to them. An amount of 15,000 rupees as a one-time grant is given to the group which can be used for the purchase of raw materials, childcare facilities etc. The grant is contributed in equal measure by the central and state governments and UNICEF. However, DRA as a program was not merely to empower women with economic benefits but also provide supportive services like mother and child care, immunization, adult education etc. to realize the objectives of DRA and make it more functional. Interaction and coordination with other departments like education, health and family welfare and women and child development were required to be maintained. DRA's goal being upliftment of women and the betterment of their children, training women to acquire skills for fruitful engagement was of paramount importance. Training was imparted by various agencies at different levels to women under DRA. Identification of variable activities and projects were done by the entrusted officials with their assistants. The activities included tailoring, knitting, bamboo basket making, fishing, poultry, pottery, soap making, candle making, etc. The DGRA also suffered from deficiencies and impediments. These were mainly shortage of functionaries at every level, lack of infrastructural facilities and credit, problems in selection of projects, lack of clarity regarding role of the groups, and low motivation of the members of the groups. It has been observed by the midterm appraisal of the 7th plan that training provided under 1 RISM and DGRA is not up to the mark, and there is a tendency to stick to only a few traditional crafts like tailoring, carpentry, etc. Therefore, a fresh look is needed to be given to identification of trades and activities which may be gainfully taken up by women. Many income-generating activities have not succeeded because full thought had not been given to input availability, marketability of the product, training needs and future scope for the activity. As pointed out by Mohinder Singh, pertinent suggestions given by the NIRT study are giving more attention to DGRA by BRDE officials, filling up all vacant posts of functionaries under DGRA on priority basis, giving orientation to APIS at the initial stage to enable them perform their function. Check your progress. -4. 1. What was the necessity for a separate program for women? 3.10 Rural employment programs. As mentioned earlier, majority of the population, as nearly 3/4 of it, depends on agriculture for their existence. This dependence on agriculture continues to grow. Due to this growing population and limited expansion of the economy, much of the rural labor force remained underemployed or unemployed. This situation of the small marginalized farmers and the landless laborers becomes acute. Since many of them were neither educated nor skilled, they were not in a position to benefit from the trainings of self-employment schemes. Considering the gravity of the problem right from 4th plan period, a crash rural employment program, CREP, in I% 9 on a pilot basis in some selected districts, where the agriculture labor population 40 was comparatively high. Again in 1973-74, a pilot rural employment program, PREP, was launched in areas presumed to be critically affected by the problem of unemployment. Later in the year 1978-79, a new program called Food for Work, FFW, was launched, merging the programs CREP and PREP. As the food stock was quite plentiful in the country, it was possible to think of providing food grains as part of the wages. Such a method of payment could benefit the wage earners getting food grains at a cheaper rate. It solved the problem of the government to reduce the pressure for large amount of funds for wage employment and simultaneously making proper use of the growing buffer stock in the country. With further redesigning, the FFW was converted to National Rural Employment Program, NREP, in the year 1980. This entire country was brought under THE coverage of the program, which had mainly two objectives: to immediately provide gainful engagement for those who could not benefit from self-employment programs, to continue to build rural infrastructure and community as assets for the purpose of long-term economic development of rural areas. Despite the use of the food grains as part of the wage, the NREP fell short of resources for expanded coverage to provide adequate wage employment for wage seeker in rural areas. It was not even possible to cover 50 villages in the country. As a supplement of NREP and to ensure 100 days of employment to at least one of the member of a family, a program under the nomenclature Rural Labor Employment Guarantee Program, RLAGP, was launched in the year 1983. The LAGP, being a central-sponsored program, had 80% share from central government and the 20% from the states. In the course of 7 to 8 years of its implementation, the coverage of the program was just about 55%. The objective of providing 100 days employment to at least one member of a family of agriculture laborer could not be met. Besides, the villagers had very little participation, both in terms of identifying and in the planning and implementation of work under NREP and RLAGP. Villagers could not be provided with employment nearer to their villages, as the projects were identified by the block or district authorities at locations far from the villages of employment seeker. To overcome the above shortcomings, like covering all the villages and involving the villagers through village panchayats, the two programs NREP and RLAGP were merged to form a new program, the Jawahar Rozgar Yojana, JRY, that was introduced in April 1989. The primary objective of JRY was to create additional IGNOU employment for both men and women unemployed and underemployed persons in rural areas. The secondary objective was to create productive community assets for direct and continuing benefits to the poverty groups and for strengthening rural economic and social infrastructures, which will lead to rapid growth of rural economy along with a steady rise in the income levels of rural poor. Another secondary objective is to bring improvement in the overall quality of life in the rural areas. 3.10.1 works under JRY. Works to be taken up under JRY were such that it had the maximum potential of continuing benefits for the poor in the villages. It constituted of creations of assets that were to directly or otherwise ensure contribution of income-generating activities for the poor. Higher priority was to be given to infrastructure building for the development of the village like school buildings etc. Works that would benefit SCS/STs, bonded laborers etc. 3.10.2 Impact of JRY. The evaluation study conducted by the Ministry of Rural Development revealed that against a target of a minimum of 100 man-days of wage employment per family per year, only 11 man-days was created, which means the JRY grossly failed to achieve its objective of employment generation. The underscore reasons for poor performance were: the resources were too thinly spread to maximize coverage of the area and the beneficiaries. Selection of works was neither labor-intensive nor did they have much relevance to the area or fulfill local needs, and the program was perceived to be for building assets. However, there were two positive outcomes of the program. The program made possible to create durable community assets like school buildings, panchayat ghars, community halls and other much-needed infrastructure in the villages. The program having been executed by the Grandpa Panchayat was a great sense of empowerment for the local government. Besides, it provided the opportunity to the Panchayat leaders to plan and manage the development works of the villages as per its requirements. The local participation in the program ensured greater efficiency in the implementation of the program because the Panchayat leaders had greater stake than the government machinery. 3.11 Employment Assurance Scheme. The JRY, despite its coverage of the entire country and implemented by the Gram Panchayats to ensure all the villages benefit out of the program, fell short of its expectations. It could not solve the problem of underemployment and unemployment, especially in the remote, difficult and backward areas. For such areas, opportunities for agriculture employment was very little and the cost of living was much higher due to inaccessibility and backwardness. The minimum wages did not in one prove the purchasing power in comparison to wage earners of other areas. To overcome the problem of poverty in such areas, Government of India brought in revamped public distribution system, RPDS, in the year 1992-93 to provide subsidized and adequate supplies of food grains to the poor. Such areas were identified as difficult and backward areas and constituted of 1,778 blocks across 261 districts in the country. In due course, to intensify eradication of poverty in these blocks, a new program called Employment Assurance Scheme, EAS. As in JRY, the primary objective of the EAS was to provide gainful employment during lean agriculture season in the form of manual works to all able-bodied adults who were in need and desirous of working, but unable to find anything to do. The secondary objective was to develop economic infrastructure and community assets and resources for sustained employment and development. 3.11.1 Main features of EAS. As mentioned by Dr. B.K. Taplial, to operationalize the program, to achieve its objectives, initially the main features of the program design were as follows. Scheme was operative in 1778 blocks of the country. Funding of the scheme was on the basis of 80-20 between the center and states. The central government's share of funding was directly released blockwise to ZP/. BRDE based on the demand for wage employment and expenditure. Scheme was demand-driven and therefore there was no fixed budgetary provision for the scheme. Maximum of TW9 adults per family were to be provided for the wage employment up to 100 days in a year. New jobs were not to be started, If the employment potential was available through plan and non-plan works already in progress in a particular area and the assurance could be fulfilled by utilizing the same. The work should be labor-intensive as well as result in the creation of durable and productive assets. An individual beneficiary project based on the lands of BPL families was allowed. For horticulture development, the persons who desire for wage employment should get registered with the village development officer or Grand Panchayat, which would issue a family card for the purpose. When more than 10 workers demand work, new projects could be started. The scheme is implemented by the RDA and other district officers of various departments, block development officers and the panchayats at all 3 levels, i.e. Zila Panchayat, Panchayat Samiti, and Grand Panchayats. The state-level coordination committee for the rural development program has the responsibility for overall supervision, guidance and monitoring of BUS. The ES and JRY were merged to form a new program called Sampurna Gramin Rozgar Yojana, SGRY, which was launched in the year 2001. Check your progress. 5. 1. Why was ES introduced? You are listening to this audiobook on Audio Learn IGNOU.
3.12. Let us sum up. In this unit we have learnt about rural development programs, the early attempts and experiments in rural development. We noted that community development program has a holistic approach as it encompassed not only agriculture but also infrastructure and basic facilities in the villages. We have discussed the impact of the Green Revolution, which had far-reaching impact to avoid the food crisis. Discussing anti-poverty programs, we learnt the objectives and strategies of the program. The Integrated Rural Development Program was discussed in details. We also assessed the administrative structure, implementation procedures and funding of IRDP. We discussed TRISM and assessed its impact. TRISM was essentially for training youth for self-employment. Next we discussed the special program for development of women and children in rural areas. The targets of DRA are the rural poor as in the case of IRDP, but the unit of beneficiaries is a group consisting of 15 to 20 women. We discussed the funding mechanism of DRA, its functioning and its organizational support structure. We went on to discuss the developments in rural employment programs and dealt with Jawahar Rozgar Yojana. In the end we evaluated employment assurance scheme and discussed the functioning of ES. 3.13 Keywords. Trickle-down effect. The effects of development such as employment spreading wider to benefit more and more people. Community development, a program launched for rural development in 1952. Green Revolution breakthrough in increasing agriculture production during the 60s. Poverty line, this is the monetary value of the average calorie intake of 2,400 calories per person per day as the poverty line income. Rural youth, rural men and women in the age group of 15 to 35. Entrepreneurship, ability to manage a scheme/pro-age CT or income generation venture. Wage employment, employment on daily wages. Community assets, assets like community halls, village roads, village markets etc. which are used by all the village people. Rural infrastructure, roads, electrification of villages and pump sets, hospitals, schools, drinking water facilities, market yards etc. Mandates measurement of employment in terms of work done by an average adult for one day, 8 hours as a unit. Thank you. We will see you in the next video.